Hey guys, Drifter here. Did you know that World of Warcraft players created Donald Trump's presidency? And yes, I said that correctly. No, it's not clickbait, and no, it's not fake news. This is an actual real fact, and it is a fascinating story that we're going to go over today. The video we're going to be talking about is on a political topic. However, it is not a video designed to express political opinion or preference. It's more of a historical study, but it's going to be very, very recent history, so it's more akin to news. We are going to be looking at a fascinating series of events from World of Warcraft's early days that directly led to Donald Trump being president through Steve Bannon. And I've got sources for all of this too. If you don't believe me, we've got sources listed down here below in the description. You can click around, read them, and make up your own mind. So let's start off this story by going back to the early 2000s, just after the dot-com bubble bursted, but still where you could put .com on almost anything and make money. The internet was really just starting off, at least in its current form. I think we were just hitting like Web 2.0, Firefox was just taking over Internet Explorer, and when it came to gaming, the hottest things on the planet were MMOs, specifically EverQuest at the time, and World of Warcraft would be coming very shortly, as it is very relevant to this story. A lot of players back then didn't like to grind for gold or currency or in-game items, and they would just rather spend real money to buy things. It was just as common then as it is now, except digital economies and marketplaces were far less common, so in order to do that, they had to seek out sort of third-party markets. Funny how it looks from a historical perspective, because microtransactions and buying things in-game is looked down upon now, despite being normal, but it was a feature that a lot of people would have wanted back then. A guy by the name of Brock Pierce, who is a former child actor who starred in the Mighty Ducks series, founded a company designed to provide a digital marketplace service for people that just wanted to buy gold. The short version is he lost all of his money from his Hollywood acting, hit rock bottom, and was playing EverQuest when he came up with this brilliant idea for a company. So him and a friend founded this company called IGE.com, or Internet Gaming Entertainment. It was one of the first digital item trading sites on the internet, and one of the first true digital marketplaces on the internet that only traded digital, completely non-physical items, or at least one of the big ones. I'm sure if you want to go and look in your history, you'll find a digital marketplace for items that was in 1992, but this was the big one back in the day. And this company, Internet Gaming Entertainment, like most of the early .coms, didn't really follow a lot of rules. There weren't really a lot of government regulations regardless of where you incorporated. They kind of ignored most games' terms of service and regulations, etc. The company wasn't fly-by-night. They weren't going to disappear with all of your money, kind of like all those CSGO skin websites or whatever, but they were fast and loose with the laws. They didn't play by a lot of regulations. And most of the companies they service, such as World of Warcraft and EverQuest, all had policies that forbid players from buying items outside of the game. If you got caught buying and trading items outside the game, you could be suspended, you could have your items taken away, account punished. Usually they didn't punish the player, rather they would punish the person that was selling this sort of thing. It still happened all the time. You could literally go to Craigslist and just buy an epic mount or something like that. And as a general rule of economics, if there is a demand, a supply will pop up. Even if the demand is completely illegal, like drugs, prostitution, a hitman, something, a supply will pop up at some price, and in this case, Internet Gaming Entertainment popped up to meet that demand. They came in at a perfect time because online gaming was exploding. It was booming, it was growing fast, multiplayer games were growing really, really fast, and the company grew super fast. Brock Pierce, who was rich, poor, now became wealthier than he had ever been again. And when I mean big, we're talking this company went from almost nothing to pulling $250 million of income per year, kind of huge. However, it had a unique problem, and the problem is that all of the people involved at the company, ownership or executive level, were all very young. They were under 25, and it was also in a market that very few big companies or old players understood, poorly regulated, poorly understood by governments, and it was sort of this nebulous, oh, it's what the kids, that the young people are doing with their internets these days. But the people that ran the company, Brock specifically, had higher aspirations. They wanted to go up, 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 up. They wanted to make this company bigger and bigger and bigger, but in order to do that, they needed outside funding. So around late 2005, early 2006, they started hiring outside consultants and representatives to try and get big investments. And this is where it starts tying into politics. Enter Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is a name that I'm sure many of you recognize. He's best known for being the CEO of the Trump campaign. Basically, he ran most of the campaign after Manafort. He was later his chief strategist at the White House and the White House Senior Counsel. He was fantastically parodied in Saturday Night Live as the Spectre of Death.
Hello, Donald. I have arrived.
Hi, Steve. You look rested.
Thank you.
And was pretty much constantly at odds with the old media establishment. Just we're going to do a quick backstory on him because it's so fascinating. He was a naval officer, worked at the Pentagon as a special assistant and advisor, became a Goldman Sachs investment banker, very relevant to our story. He started an independent investment firm aside from Goldman Sachs that specialized in media investments and invested in several media projects, including taking a stake in the show Seinfeld. He worked on biosphere projects, kind of like the ones you saw in the Biodome movie starring Pauly Shore. He would later become a film producer and produced about 18 films, several of which were very politically motivated, this sort of documentary, right-wing kind of films, whatever, and later invested in internet holdings, which is where we catch up with him in our story. He was getting very interested and invested in internet entertainment, so he decided to come on board with IGE, Internet Gaming Entertainment, as a consultant. And Bannon was extremely interested in this company for a lot of reasons, but mostly because he recognized they had a huge untapped market of gamers. There was just some liquid fire to this company that he could put his hands on and feel, and he knew there was something big about it. After about a year there, he successfully convinced his former employer, Goldman Sachs, to invest in internet gaming entertainment. The investment was rumored to be about $60 million, and it restructured. They sold some equity. It was a pretty standard thing. So a lot of the early founders got really rich, and Goldman Sachs got some equity and some control. And Steve Bannon continued to study and learn this business because he was very interested in it. He studied it very, very intently. He learned a lot about the customer and about the market. Some of the things he did is he helped expand operations significantly so they could farm a lot more gold, operate in a lot more countries. They could help organize the financials to pay less tax, etc., etc. You know, big boy adult work. Some of it operational efficiency too. The dark side of all this is that the gold and items were primarily mined in China and in poorer Asian countries. The people that mined the digital gold were paid about 25 cents an hour or less, depending on where they were, and they were doing very repetitive tasks for like 12 hours a day, like literally click to mine, just sit there and click, 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 and do nothing else for 12 hours. They weren't playing World of Warcraft. They were just clicking 12 hours a day. The basic idea was that there was a whole army of people in China that wanted money and had a whole bunch of free time and weren't really employed at the moment. And there were a whole bunch of comparatively wealthy people in the US that wanted gold and had more money but didn't have the time to earn it. So there was a nice sort of trade going on. The dark side to this, though, is that conditions were pretty poor for most of these people. They were considered digital sweatshops. They weren't really great places to work. And some gold miners were prisoners. There's no evidence of this particular company using Chinese prisoners to mine gold, but quite a few Chinese prisoners, political or otherwise, were put to work mining gold because that labor, the prison would then sell the gold to like some World of Warcraft marketplace, and somebody somewhere along the chain would make money on it. So that's kind of a gross thing, but that's not really the point of this video. Eventually, lawsuits, regulations, terms of service violations, crackdowns, and security measures from companies, countries, and all sorts of things around the world caught up to IGE, and the profits started to dry up. They tried to pivot the company into an entertainment company. They restructured it. They changed ownership. They did a lot of things, but ultimately the company went bust. It didn't pan out. A lot of people got rich, some people went broke, but the most important thing about this is that Steve Bannon learned more from working at this company than anybody else did. Steve Bannon was the first person probably in the world to realize that there was a super highly motivated, angry, and influential group of white males out there. However, they were just hard to reach. They were notoriously skeptical. And this group of motivated white males that I'm talking about Think about your average PC gamer, your average person posting on Reddit about how everything is awful, the average person leaving YouTube comments, the angry guy on Twitter, the 4chan, the 8chan, all the chans, all the way down. All that sort of very toxic, angry culture, the people that make pedophile jokes and Nazi jokes, that sort of internet culture, anonymous, they got a little weird on that too. That is what he was talking about. These people were wealthy, they were tech savvy, they were smart, they could be influential, they could be loud, they could be motivated to do all kinds of crazy stuff like attack Scientology, for example. However, they didn't buy into anything. You couldn't reach them with a normal marketing campaign. You couldn't encourage them to do something. There wasn't a product that they really all flocked to. So while it was this awesome group of people to extract money and influence from, you couldn't do anything. And also, they were oddly apolitical. A lot of them weren't super into politics more than just making fun of politics. They did quite a lot of making fun of politics, but very few beliefs inside that group as a whole. So Steve Bannon does some other projects, and he eventually gets hired on to Breitbart News. And 4 years later, Andrew Breitbart dies. And Steve Bannon, who is on the, I believe he was on the board of advisors at the time. I think that was the role. Eventually, he would assume leadership of this fledgling news site called Breitbart News. Breitbart was originally a small aggregator site. They had links. They would share AP news articles and things like that. Eventually, they moved it a little bit more tabloid style. Then they had Breitbart TV. And when Steve Bannon took over, they were a very minor news organization. They weren't very big or influential. But this is where all the World of Warcraft stuff is finally going to pay off. So Steve Bannon gets control of a news organization. And he thinks this would be a perfect site, a perfect aggregator, a perfect place, incubator is perhaps the better word, for all of these angry gamers to come and coalesce. I can make that my user base. His genius idea was to purposefully move Breitbart away from right-wing, which it already was fairly right-wing, but it was kind of a right middle like aggregator, and make it very right wing, and also to specifically hire people to activate and motivate that gamer army that he'd worked with previously in his World of Warcraft dealings, and use that to build an initial user base on Breitbart to propel it out onto the greater internet and meet more like-minded people. Steve Bannon correctly believed that there would be a lot of ideological overlap between right-wing politics and gamers, but more importantly, a very strong psychographic overlap between the attitudes that gamers had and right-wing politics, right-wing outrage in this case, idea sharing through memes, method of communications, and a sort of quest for a technocracy, for lack of better words. And he also decided to hire Milo Yiannopoulos, man, I hope I'm saying that name right, to attract more white males. He said, and I quote, "I realized Milo could connect with these kids right away. You can activate that army, they come in through Gamergate or whatever, and then they get turned on to politics and to Trump." Milo was initially brought on to cover Gamergate and gamer-related stories in order to attract gamers to the news website. He had initially expressed a great disinterest in gaming, indifference perhaps, but with the intense focus of many different things on Gamergate, he was able to give Breitbart and that website sort of a foothold in the controversy and get viewers onto the site. The website also covered a great number of tech articles, gaming articles, and associated internet topics that would appeal to Reddit users, 4chan users, people on Twitter, angry gamers in general, to pull in a strong user base. Obviously, this strategy worked. Breitbart News was very successful. The gamers were a very good fit with the website, and they did exactly as Bannon predicted, kickstart the user base of the website. That was the very core of the website, at least at the time. It gave it a big enough presence to spread out into the greater internet. It did exactly attract other like minds, either politically, ideologically, or simply psychographically based on the memes and expressions of outrage. The website would continue to grow and become more successful, eventually helping to give birth to what's now known as the alt-right. I'm going to use that term very, very loosely. I know that's a very hot button one now. I know there's a lot of disagreements on what is and isn't alt-right and good and bad. But let's just say it is, at least in part, responsible for the birth of the alt-right in the United States. Breitbart News was also very supportive of Donald Trump very early on in the primary race. The reason for this is because Bannon believed that Donald Trump's attitude would resonate with the user base, the politics of outrage, the way he said things, the way he trolled people, the way he posted on Twitter. And the general attitude is so much like that of a snarky, angry gamer, and thus a snarky, angry, outraged right-wing individual, that it was a perfect fit. And they offered almost unflinching support for Trump throughout the entire thing. Trump, being, we'll just say who he is, enjoys his compliments, and he was very interested in Breitbart, and he met with Bannon, and he eventually started to like Bannon and hired Bannon to become the CEO of his campaign. Bannon, as CEO or leader of the Donald Trump presidential campaign, used the same tactics that he used to grow Breitbart, which is primarily activating frustrated white men in various regions of the world for political campaigns, in order to fuel the presidential campaign. And it was very successful. In my personal opinion, and this is the only little bit of opinion that you're going to get here on this video, is that most of the important battles of the Clinton-Trump campaign were fought online. There was a great deal on TV, I know, in print media and all that. But online was where the real war was at, and this battle was dominated mostly by young men, mostly by people shitposting, mostly memes, and a sort of alt-right explosion. Previous to this presidential campaign, the internet was like the home of the left. If you were on the internet, you generally saw a lot of left-wing stuff, and right-wing stuff just got downvoted to the ground. This campaign completely inverted that, and right-wing people came out and exploded all over the internet as like nothing I've ever seen in my life. And it was super successful. Trump's attitude, his politics, the Breitbart support, the right-wing outrage, the memes, the tweets, all of this sort of stuff grew on each other. It was the sum of the parts are greater than the whole. It was a perfect combination, a perfect fit, just the right people doing just the right things, and Donald Trump became president, and it's successful by their measure. So that is how and why World of Warcraft players would help Donald Trump become the president of the United States. Story doesn't have a happy ending for Steve Bannon. He got fired after a relatively short period of time. He's now estranged from the president and working on some right-wing projects in the European Union at the moment. It's a strange one, but I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something useful from it, because for me, this was a fascinating story. It's a story of seemingly unrelated things coming together to create something enormous, and that to me is fascinating. So if you did enjoy this video and you want to see more like it, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.